Okay, welcome everyone. Thanks so much to everyone for being here and to you, Kelsey, obviously. So welcome to, I think it's the 8th segment of our webinar series. And, these webinars, as we've been telling you guys every week, is to help you become the best pro-life student you can be on campus. So we hope you take a lot out of the show, and as always, you have the opportunity to submit questions through the Q&A tab. We'll start taking questions from everyone about halfway through the show. As usual, you guys probably know the drill by now. And if you haven't met me already, my name is Ruth Shaw. I'm the Executive Director of National Campus Life Network and today's host. So thank you so much for being here, and we're very proud to be able to work with all of you as leaders fighting against abortion and the greatest human rights injustice of our time. All of our work through NCLN is made possible through your commitment, so thank you so much for being here and taking the time. So I'm pleased to introduce you today to Kelsey. Kelsey, you and I have known each other for a few years just through social media and through running pro-life stuff, so we obviously have a very deep and meaningful relationship. And I hope to get to know you more a little bit today. So for those of you who are not familiar with Secular Pro-Life, Kelsey is the founder of Secular Pro-Life, and it was founded in 2009, and she serves as the president. Her writings appear regularly in pro-life media, and she is featured in the pro-life documentary 40. Kelsey has also made appearances in mainstream news sources like NPR, BuzzFeed, and Slate. She is a graduate of the University of Miami, where she founded the school's pro-life student organization, and a graduate of the University of Virginia Law School. Immediately following law school, she was selected for a Robert F. Kennedy Public Service Fellowship, which allowed her to devote a year to public interest work with Americans United for Life. She's now an attorney in private practice in Naples, Florida. Welcome.
Thank you for that lovely introduction.
Yeah, thanks for being
almost
here.
Like I wrote it myself.
Yeah. It's a nice thing about bios, I guess. You can say whatever you want. Kelsey, so tell us a little bit about yourself and specifically your convictions on the pro-life issue. So you yourself are an atheist. So I think I would love to hear about what underlines your pro-life conviction. So for many of our students, if you were to peel back the layers of a pro-life conviction, a lot of it, because a lot of our students come from a religious background, it would be, dignity would probably be a big one that you would hear a lot about. Obviously, human rights is a big one that has nothing really to do with religion. But if you peel that back, even some could argue that it does have to do with dignity. So we obviously on campus speak about abortion from a secular perspective, but internal conviction, would probably include some aspect of religion. So tell us from your perspective, what's the foundation of your stance against abortion?
Yeah, so it might help for the listeners to have a little bit of background on my personal upbringing, which is that I grew up in the United Methodist Church, which is officially a pro-choice denomination of Christianity.
Yeah.
If you can say that there is such a thing. I know plenty of Christians say if it's pro-choice, it's not really Christian.
Yeah.
But that was my upbringing. And that did not, thankfully, involve the preacher going up to the pulpit and saying abortion is great. It really involved silence and cowardice and just not speaking about abortion at all. So it was never a religious issue for me. I had the general luckily I have wonderful parents who gave me good values on a broad level as far as sticking up for the little guy and the golden rule, treating others as you would like to be treated, and that sort of thing. So I had that base. And then once I learned what abortion was, it was not hard to figure out that abortion is wrong. So it was just, I never came at it. Even when I was a person of faith, it was never a faith issue for me. And for quite a while there, I was involved in pro-life advocacy in direct opposition to my church, which obviously was not sustainable. So I think we do need to be careful about equating Christian with pro-life, because that is sometimes, sadly, not the case. But yeah, so when when people, especially Christians, start asking the type of question that you just asked about, like, what's at the core, what's the base, what is the source of human dignity, that's way bigger than the abortion debate, right? Like, you're basically asking, why care about anybody at all? Why not just go raping and pillaging and murder? Like, obviously abortion is not the only assault on human dignity out there. So when you ask, why do secular people care about human dignity, that takes things way beyond the abortion debate.
Yeah, that's true.
And which isn't to say that it's a bad question or a wrong question, just probably more of a question than can be answered in an hour.
Sure, yeah.
But just in a nutshell, first of all, because I'm a secular person and we don't have a particular scripture or papal authority or whatever that we can point to and say, here is the answer, that everybody has to go on their own investigation and figure out what their values are. So when you talk to 5 secular people, you'll get at least 5 answers about that sort of thing. That being said, I tend to look at things from a historical perspective, right? We have, I mentioned earlier the golden rule, which is common to pretty much all religious, belief systems out there, and seems to be necessary for a functioning society. So many different cultures in all different parts of the world in different times and places have hit upon the golden rule or something very similar to it. So the question then becomes, okay, if we're supposed to treat others as we would like to be treated, who are those others? Who counts? It's not, so most secular people come to this with the assumption that, yes, there are human rights, but who is part of that human family and who gets excluded? So when I then take a historical approach to it, it seems to me that every time a society has taken some group of human beings and excluded them, they're not really people, future generations have never looked back on that decision with pride, right? Like, that has never once gone well, and it's always 100% of the time a rationalization for
right.
There's just no two ways around that.
Right. So it's a very consistent kind of thing we see throughout history.
Exactly. So that's probably, if I had to give sort of the 5-minute elevator speech for why I feel the way that I do about human rights, I would say history. Learn some, open a book. But as I said, most secular people already believe or accept the concept of human rights. It's a matter of convincing that person that unborn children belong in the category. And the pro-choice people will, of course, come up with 15 different reasons why they shouldn't be, many of which are mutually exclusive. But when I was at the point in my life where I was evaluating that, like, okay, well, because the baby isn't conscious, because the fetus isn't self-aware, or the fetus depends upon another person, like, every one of those criteria, if they were to be applied consistently across the board, would encompass some group of humans outside the womb.
Right.
And usually those who get caught up are people with disabilities. So if you're, and that's why I really do view the pro-life movement and disability rights movements as sisters.
So, like, I guess.
Go ahead.
The question that was kind of buzzing in my head as you were talking. You talk a lot about the golden rule, right? And in fact, some people might argue that the golden rule is a Christian principle found in the Bible, or originated in the writings of the Bible. And so the question is, when you're talking to someone on campus, or you're trying to evaluate, for those in our clubs who are not religious but against abortion, that's where the question of dignity sort of comes in, right? Why are human beings valuable, if not for, because we were made in the image and likeness of God, as many of our students might say. So for you, I understand there's a historical context to devaluing human life, and that's, you can see that as wrong. Is there something about humans that, you know, a secular pro-life person might say this is why they're valuable, you know, outside of, you know, religious convictions, because they're not necessarily believing in God.
Yeah, well, I mean, the golden rule is not, it's a Christian principle, but not exclusively a Christian principle.
Okay.
I mean, like I said, it's something that seems to crop up just about everywhere because you can't have a functioning society without it. You know, if it's just a free-for-all where everyone's out for themselves, nobody wants to live in that world.
Exactly.
Okay, we're here in a society, we have we get the benefits of that. The protection of society and other people respecting our rights. Okay, well, what is that? What's the corollary obligation then? Because for every right there's a responsibility. So that's generally how I would approach it. I will say, I came at this originally from this sort of pure logic. Okay, none of the justifications that the pro-choicers are giving make any sense, and we have human rights principles that are broad for a reason. But the longer I have been in the pro-life movement, the more reasons I've accumulated for being pro-life, right? So, and some of those reasons are people. Like people I have gotten to know and who I'm proud to call my friends, who were targeted when they were in the womb. So I don't want to inadvertently reinforce this stereotype that like all atheists are Spock and all logic and no emotion. Of course the abortion debate is emotional. Duh. I don't deny that. And like I said, the longer I've been involved, really digging into the pro-life feminist history and argument. I mean, all of these things. There's no one reason to be pro-life. Just bring them on. The more angles you can attack it from, the better.
Yeah, and I do think, even for myself, having, heard more and more stories of people who have survived abortions, it just brings so much of that conversation home.
Absolutely.
I want to read you a quote from Christopher Hitchens about being pro-life. It was actually, I think we found it on your blog. Your blog is called ProLife Humanists, I think.
No, that's actually, but I do know who they are. We're friends.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So Christopher Hitchens said, I think that so he was an atheist as well, but he was questioned about being pro-life. And he said, I think that if the concept of child means anything, the concept unborn child can said to mean something. All the discoveries of embryology and viability, which have been very considered in the last generation or so, appear to confirm that opinion, which I think should be innate to everyone. It's innate to the Hippocratic Oath. It's instinct in anyone who's ever watched a sonogram. So yes, my answer is yes, I'm pro-life. So yeah, what do you think about his statement and his reasoning for being pro-life? Is that something you share?
Yeah, I think he's certainly onto something when he talks about the unborn child being a material reality. I mean, so many pro-choice people rely upon making the unborn an abstraction, hidden under 15 layers of euphemism, or the sort of idea that it's a baby when she wants it and tissue when she's not. That kind of subjectivity rung amok is very offensive, I think, to people who value reason, which atheists and other non-religious folks tend to do. So yeah, for sure. I don't know if it's necessarily instinctive for all people. I mean, some people are able to look at an ultrasound and just say, whatever. But I think most people, if they're being honest with themselves, do realize that we're talking about human beings.
It was actually interesting. Just a few days ago, I was debating live a pro-choice woman on a podcast that one of my friends has. And I was asking her about, Stephanie Gray talks a lot about the parent-child relationship and how it's instinct. And so therefore, your responsibilities to your child is different than your responsibilities to a stranger. Ergo, that's one of the reasons that abortion is not okay. You're killing your own offspring. And so I was asking her, she's also an atheist, and I was asking her if she felt that the parent-child relationship was instinctual and somehow different than your relationships with other people. And she had a really hard time answering that. Like, she said that there was something that kind of obviously showed that the relationship was different, but she was
you froze up.
Oh no, can you hear me?
I hear you now. It was just for a second.
Okay.
Just say the last line.
Yeah, she said that she could identify there was something different about the relationship, but she couldn't say what it was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't know if instinct is necessarily the right word. I don't want to suggest that all women have a maternal instinct or that all men have a paternal instinct, because there are some rare instances where that is not the case.
Yeah.
I think what makes the parent-child relationship really unique, especially in terms of the ethical responsibilities involved, is the fact that this child would not be here but for you. Yeah, and depends on you totally.
Yes. Yeah.
So at a bare minimum, you have a responsibility to make sure that somebody is looking after this child, even if it can't be you. That is how I would describe the uniqueness of the child.
I love that. I think that makes a lot of sense, because I was curious after, if you conceive a child that you were not intending to have, would you really, do you consider them your offspring? And I do like, that turn of phrase. I think that makes a lot of sense, that they wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you. I just think mentally a lot of people don't consider them to be your child or your offspring because they didn't want them or intend for them to be created,
Yeah, I mean, when it comes down to something as fundamental as whether somebody lives or dies, I really don't want it to be based on how you feel. Not to knock, the wonderful feelings that mothers have for their children, but we just had Mother's Day yesterday. But from a legal point of view, it cannot be based upon wantedness or sentimentality.
Absolutely. So, would you call your position on abortion uncommon?
Not really. So I think, first of all, if you're just looking at the numbers, there have been some surveys conducted, and I'm sorry to go American on you. I don't have Canadian.
Okay.
We do have American surveys that break down, views on abortion, views on religion, how they overlap, and that sort of thing.
Okay.
And that shows roughly 15 to 20% of non-religious Americans taking a pro-life position, which is, I'll be the first to say that's not great. We need to do better. But in numerical terms, that's still a lot of people. That's over 12 million people. It's the population of the state of Illinois.
Okay, interesting.
So uncommon? No, definitely not uncommon. And then when you add to that, there are a lot of religious people, whether that's Christian or some other religion, who still come at this from what is essentially a secular viewpoint and would agree with everything that I have said in the past 20 minutes. If you start to add those numbers, then it's just overwhelming.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about how some of your conversations go with pro-choice people, when they, seemingly inevitably, it seems, ask you the question, are you religious?
Yeah.
And talk about some of those stories and the conversions that have happened.
I mean, it's easy for me because I can just say, no, I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm really fortunate. No, I think every conversation is different because every person is different. I really like, and I forget who first said it, but if you're going to have a conversation with people and you're going to be talking about something as emotional and controversial as abortion, people don't want to be seen as a project, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you need to build relationships, and you need to treat the person as like that. That is the pro-life thing to do, is to treat the person in front of you, the person, and ask a lot of questions. One thing that I always emphasize when I'm giving like apologetics discussions and presentations is, if somebody tells you, oh, I'm pro-choice, that gives you next to no information, because the pro-choice movement has a lot of division in it that they have very successfully papered over in terms of media coverage. But just to give an example, the person who is pro-choice because they believe that, you know, without Roe v. Wade, women are going to be, you know, dying on the streets by the hundreds of thousands with coat hangers.
Yeah.
That is a very different person from the person who thinks it's not really a baby. And that's a very different, different person from the one who's like, we have to have abortion or women can't be equal. Those are three very different people with three very different reasons who will probably come down differently on, you know, laws about parental consent or informed consent, gestational limits, like all of those things. So just because somebody says, oh, I'm pro-choice, that doesn't really tell you much. You have to ask a lot of questions about why and in what circumstances and what's bringing them there, so you can figure out, okay, what is the block and how do I beat the block?
Right. So, I mean, I'm sure you've heard this before, but one of the common things we hear on campus a lot is like humans are just no different than animals, right? Like there is no difference, and
nobody actually lives their life that way. No. I'm sorry, like that's just people trying to be provocative. Like nobody goes around. If you all are not already following on Facebook the page Shout Your Cannibalism, go do it now. It's hysterical. And it just takes every Shout Your Abortion type post and just changes the words to be about cannibalism and eating people, and it is a riot, but it makes the point so vividly. Like, yes, people, even the people who say we're no different than animals, nobody actually.
Yeah, but I do think that one of the sort of value systems that is coming out through that kind of question is that like we're not very valuable, you know, or that human beings are not somehow, you know, to be valued differently, when obviously if you actually question how they live that out. You know, so again, one of the reasons that, you know, I think at that point in the conversation, even I've struggled to not say, well, like, why do you think you might be valuable? Like, where does your value come from? So how would you answer a question like that?
I mean, I think I would make it personal. Like, do you believe that you are valuable?
Right.
And
explore that.
And explore that, because, you know, some people have a lot of trauma and hurt in their lives and just might not be in a place where they're ready. You know, maybe they do have suicidal feelings.
Yeah.
You know, maybe they are not ready for an abortion debate. Maybe they need some deeper help. You know, so I always try to be sensitive to that. Especially if you're talking to someone who you think may have had an abortion.
Right. Definitely.
People struggle. You've got, you know, even when, you know, I'll file it back in my head like, oh, that's ridiculous. I'll laugh about it later, but right now, let me stay with the person I'm talking to.
Yeah, I think there is a case to be made for, you know, you matter because you exist.
Yeah.
And that means something. You know, you're here and that means something. And I've even, you know, apologized for, you know, ways that maybe someone hasn't felt valuable, and acknowledging that that's a huge reality for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So one thing that I was really curious about, Kelsey, that I read in the National Review, that you have people involved in SPL from all sorts of religious backgrounds, including Wiccans. And so I was very curious about what's that like, and, you know, on a sort of different community base. I was curious if you have people also involved from the transgender community or the gay communities, and how do you build those bridges?
Yeah, so we're very, very lucky. It does feel like herding cats sometimes, but it's also really fun. And I can't think of any other position I could be in where I would meet such a diverse array of people. It's really amazing, and it's because, you know, so many people are tired of this being just being put in this box of, oh, it's a religious thing, that it was really sort of a build it and they will come. People were really thirsty for a community like this. So we do have some Wiccan members. One of them, this was, I think, 3 years ago, was tabling with us at the ProLife Women's Conference, which was a lot of fun. I'm really sad that I can't make it this year. And then, we get basically a lot of people whose, for whatever reason, they wouldn't identify with sort of the religious right frame.
Yeah.
Right. Either they're more liberal or they belong to a minority religion. Maybe they're Buddhist or Jewish or Mormon or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
And so it becomes a broader umbrella. Like when we talk about secular, the leadership of secular pro-life consists entirely of atheists, but the broader umbrella is much more, hey, if you're here and you want to make the case against abortion without any supernatural references, come on in. That's the mentality that we've always had from the beginning. So we have a lot of diversity in terms of religion and in terms of politics. I mean,
I can imagine.
We get everything from, MAGA Trump to like Green Party, or to like just, I don't even know if you have the Green Party in Canada, but you get the idea. And secular pro-life itself, the leadership, as you mentioned, I'm the president. I'm pretty moderate independent politically, and then my two right-hand women, one is pretty conservative and the other is just like flaming liberal, runs pro-life San Francisco, has the sort of stereotypical San Francisco hippie vibe. I love it. So we come from all over the place, but we're able to, be civil about our differences because this is about life and death and the babies need us. So
what does it mean to be a member of secular pro-life? Like when you say that, if you have like someone from a Wiccan background or trans community, like what does it look like?
So we don't impose dues. So we don't have a formal membership list. What I'm really talking about are, people who support us in terms of volunteering, contributing articles to our blog, even just following us on social media, sharing our memes, emailing us, there's all different, ways to be a part of it. So our Facebook page now is over 30,000 people.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
It's beyond anything I could have imagined when it got started in 2009.
Yeah. Do you have like maybe one specific story that you can tell the students about building a relationship or welcoming someone into your community who's like very, very different kind of lens or,
Yeah. And, so I'm going to pick this story just because it's something that emerged in like my real life. I several years ago, I lived in an apartment complex, and I was on the ground floor, and the unit above me had some, there was like a leak coming down and issues and things. So that's how we met. But we wound up becoming friends, and she was living there with her boyfriend. And she, we Facebook friended each other, and she brought up to me like the next time she saw me, she's like, so I see you're doing all this pro-life stuff. and just like, I think just wanted somebody to talk to about the fact that a few years earlier, she had gotten pregnant and she was like planning to have an abortion, had more or less chosen that, and then had a miscarriage. Aww. And she just wanted to share that story with somebody. Yeah. Because I think she didn't really know how to feel.
Yeah.
And she happened to share with me that it was 8 weeks. So I went on ehd.org, which is the Endowment for Human Development. Yeah. And I said, would you like to see what that looked like? And I told her, like, this is not a bloody picture. This is, this is just a photo. She's like, oh yeah, okay. So I showed her, and, very clearly human. And she's like, oh, okay. And we just talked for a little while longer, and she went back upstairs. And then a while later, she met up with me, and she's just like, hey, I wanted to let you know that because you showed me that picture, I realized I can never have an abortion, and I actually changed to a more reliable method of birth control. It's like,
wow, that's amazing.
So even if she, like, I don't know if she would describe herself as pro-life necessarily, but she realized that she could never herself have an abortion.
On a gradient.
Right. She moved in the gradient. So that was, that's one that stands out in my mind, because I didn't even, like during the conversation itself, it was. And I was, it was just a friendly conversation, and I didn't really think that I had moved her necessarily. Yeah. She was just like, oh, that's interesting. Kind of neutral, not really giving away how she felt. And, and if she wasn't my neighbor, I wouldn't have known that it had actually had an impact impact on.
Yeah, the ad to Facebook is a tricky one. It's a risky decision for people like us. I've had that go well, and I've had it backfire.
Well, so I think a big reason to lean on the side of friending people on Facebook is there are so many stereotypes out there about who pro-lifers are, and how are you going to challenge that if you're holed up and only talking to other pro-life people, right? I'll give a ridiculous example. When I was in law school, secular pro-life, I was already running at the time, and people could see on my social media that I was doing pro-life things. And some of my fellow students wanted to go to a bar, and we all went together. And I guess I was the designated driver or something. I was driving, and I drove up to the bar. And this one guy was like, "How did you know where this was?" I'm like, "I've been here." And he's like, "But you're pro-life."
I go to bars.
Like, did you think that pro-lifers don't drink?
I mean, some of them don't, but they're fringe, let's just say. I'm just kidding. Some of our staff don't drink, and I like to make fun of them.
Well, it's just funny too, because I don't know.
Yeah, it's such a ridiculous.
If you there's the one stereotype that everybody's Catholic. If you're pro-life, you're Catholic, and they have alcohol in a central ritual. But apparently, I don't drink. I don't know. It was weird. Don't drink to excess.
I don't drink.
But people have the weirdest preconceptions.
It's so true.
It's just bizarre. And sometimes the best or even only way to challenge that is to just be friends with somebody.
Definitely.
Be your normal, awesome self, and then they realize you're pro-life and their brain explodes.
So on that topic, I wanted to ask you just some specifics about that, about building relationship with people who are very, very different than you. So a little bit about us, we have, do a lot of outreach on campus, but a secondary part of our outreach is to build relationships. So we started these on-campus discussion groups where we invite people who've moved slightly on the gradient, or basically anyone who shows openness to dialogue at activism, to come to these discussion groups and just talk about abortion. And it's a way for abortion and
I love it.
Yeah, that kind of affect their life, right? You have all sorts of things like suicide or pornography and whatever, and you kind of push them in the direction of speaking about those issues with us by talking about abortion first. But the reality is, by doing something like that especially if you don't just target pro-life people, because that's not the goal. The goal is to really talk to anyone who's open to dialogue, right? And so you start to get, a lot of people who are mostly pro-choice or who are very pro-choice, but they're open to dialogue, which is kind of our free speech, common ground, right? So if they're open to that, let's talk. We both want that. So are there specific things that you think our clubs can do interpersonally so as to be more appealing to non-religious people? I know from a language perspective, there might be a lot of things that we who have religion involved in their lives might be saying inadvertently, or what are some tools we can employ to build better common ground with people who are not religious or just think totally different from us and are really from different worlds. A lot of us, not everyone here, but a lot of us have been raised in fairly conservative homes. And so I think it's really good for us to learn, what is it like for very non-conservative people to come into a conservative sort of community?
Yeah. So language is a big one. There are definitely certain words and phrases that hit my ear as, oh, that's a religious person.
Okay.
So, and I'll just try to think of a few of them.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Family values is family values shouldn't mean conservative Christian values. I mean, we all have families and love our families, but because that particular phrase has been so frequently used by conservative Christians, it has become, attached to that. So I would avoid that. One phrase that the first time I heard it, I had no idea what the person was talking about. As I've gotten more involved in the pro-life movement, I've rubbed shoulders with Catholics, which, and as I mentioned, I grew up Methodist, so I really know nothing. The phrase, "I'm discerning my vocation." The first time I heard that, I was like, what are you talking about? And no earthly idea what that meant. Yeah, so there's a lot of little things like that you're just like, what? So if you ever like are making a pamphlet or a poster or something and you want to run it by me, that's a service we offer. info@secularprolife.org. You can definitely do that. People do that all the time. We want to help you and improve your relations with people who don't share your background. So we can be that sort of, not sensitivity reader, but you know what I mean. Like, this is how this is going to come across.
Yeah, you're going to be our filter. A lot of our activism and like the public stuff, I think our last project we called Bloody Sexism, I think it went fairly well. So we're very used to on like an activism level approaching things secularly, but it's in the relationships that, I think where it could be easy to try to push someone towards religion without really meaning to. Or use language about dignity and those kinds of things.
I don't really mind the word dignity.
Okay.
Maybe it has a different connotation in Canada. I don't know. In the U.S., we mostly talk about rights,
right?
Or say that every human being is valuable, every human being is precious.
Right.
There's a ton of different ways to get at that without saying Imago Dei.
Yeah. Fair. Okay, we're going to take some questions from the students, if you're okay with that. So this one was sent in anonymously. So it says, if we can convince people who aren't religious that abortion is a human rights issue and that it is killing human beings, what is the best way to convince them that they should care about it and do something about it?
Yeah, apathy is a big problem across the board. It's not just the atheists. I think to the extent that you can have something immediate for the person to do, that's helpful. Having a project in the pipeline, or come to our meeting tomorrow, or something that you can get them, engaged on some small level right away. That would be my number. Provided that the thing you have coming up is not a prayer vigil. Make sure you have things on your calendar that we can actually do. That should be obvious, but not always. But yeah, if you can solve the apathy problem, let me know, because that is a toughie for sure. It's even if you can get somebody to agree with you, whatever the religious background is, people are busy. And what I always say to people is, you know what? I don't care what it is that you are doing, as long as you are doing something. Maybe you are babysitting for somebody who needs emergency childcare, or maybe you're the person who's going to Capitol Hill and doing this, that, and or maybe you're collecting diapers for your pregnancy center. Like, everybody has their little niche where they fit best, and that's fine. As long as you're doing something, I'm not going to criticize you for not doing the particular thing that I'm doing.
I think consistency of activity is very key for campus groups. I think the apathy question, in terms of motivation, I think some of the ways that we are able to motivate some students is because they are Christian, and so we're able to say, like, well, are you not required by your faith to do something? Why aren't you doing something? But I think, talking about human rights and history would be, pretty valuable as well in terms of motivation. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. I think, figuring out what motivates that person in general, what are they already doing that could have a spin on it to have a pro-life component.
This question is from Lily. So she says, when in dialogue with someone who does insist that humans are no more valuable than animals, do you have any other intellectual counter arguments aside from simply saying you probably don't actually live that way?
So I kind of wish Teresa were here, because one way to do that is, if they're vegan, and I'm not, but Teresa is, if they're vegan, get them, be like, you know what? If you value humans the same as animals, and you're not killing animals, let's not kill humans either. Yeah, like I said, it depends on the person. Like, you really need to do, like, what do you mean by that? When you say humans are no different than animals, do you just mean that humans are worthless, or do you mean that animals are worth more than society is acknowledging
Yeah.
right now? It could go either way.
Yeah.
Because if somebody is saying, oh, well, I'm pro-animal, they can be pro-life. Why not?
Yeah. I've heard Ben Shapiro put it really well. He gave a couple good examples. Like, are you saying there's no difference between eating a hamburger and a Harvey burger, like eating a human being?
Yeah, again, shout your cannibalism. That's fair, but you don't want to be dismissive of people either. Sometimes people get into an abortion debate and things are moving really fast, and they just start kind of thinking out loud.
Yeah, yeah. And then the other one that he said that I think was really good was comparing, like, if you were to hit a squirrel with your car, would you really see that as no different as running over like a newborn baby? Like, most people would not be able to comprehend people saying it's the same.
Yeah.
Okay, here's another one that was submitted anonymously. So they're asking, what is your specific stance on the criminalization of abortion? Are there any steps we must take as a society, in your opinion, prior to its criminalization to reduce the possibility of illegal abortions? If abortion were to become illegal once again and illegal abortions occur, do you believe anyone should be criminalized, the mother, the provider, or the people who help the mother? Or what about the people who help the mother find the abortion provider, or anyone else involved?
Yeah, so I look to what the law was in the United, and again, sorry, I'm American, but looking to what American law was prior to Roe versus Wade, which was our Supreme Court case that mandated legal abortion.
Mm-hmm.
The law that we had generally was against the abortionist, not the women seeking abortion, and I think that approach makes a lot of sense because you're talking about assuming the abortionist is a doctor, which was the case mostly then and certainly now. They know. They've gone about, they've seen the prenatal development. They've gone to medical school. They know.
Mm-hmm.
They're lying. And there's been 5 decades of propaganda that it's just a clump of tissue. And I don't think you can blame women, particularly younger women, for just trusting that that's correct because they're hearing it from their doctor.
Yeah.
So I do think that there's, and that's not to say that everyone who has an abortion is blameless. I think there are some people who are just, very cold-hearted about it.
Right.
But, if you're trying to come up with a policy that reduces abortions as much as possible and is something that can be applied across the board in a just way, going after the abortionist is what makes the most sense. And you can make an analogy, and it's not a perfect one, to police departments currently that prioritize prosecuting drug dealers over prosecuting drug users.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's a similar calculus at play because you've got the one that's causing widespread destruction, right? Versus the one right, versus the end users who are often desperate and
right.
Not that anybody gets addicted to abortion. I'm obviously not saying that, but have this sort of desperation in their lives where they're just they would benefit more from help from support systems than from going to prison.
Right. One thing I've thought about in the whole criminalization conversation, it's a little bit different here because we don't have, any law on abortion in Canada. And so it's a huge conversation even with sex selective abortion, like who's culpable, and people who try to, nurses and ultrasound techs who try to like reveal that information when they know it's for that purpose. So there's a lot of conversation around intent and culpability, right? So I'm curious too about those same principles of intent and culpability, which I know is a big part of criminalization, or determining who's a criminal. It's like self-defense versus other types of murders. with women who, maybe did all the research and did know what they were doing and were very aware. Do you think that culpability will be something that'll have to be determined sort of case by case?
Potentially. I mean, so the way we have things set up here is that if Roe versus Wade were reversed tomorrow, each state would be making its own law. So we would have 50 different. Yeah. Now, prior to Roe versus Wade, very few states allowed abortion. We had a pro-life system in general, with a couple of states, unfortunately, not respecting the right to life, but they were in the minority. If Roe versus Wade were reversed tomorrow, we would have a lot of variety there. But that's the purpose of our federal system is that each state can within some bounds, make its own laws, and you kind of see how things work and what works well and what doesn't, and what doesn't work as well, and the states can learn from one another. That's the idea, and Roe v. Wade just short-circuited all of that.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. This question comes from Ben. He asks, have you ever had engagement with people from your upbringing, namely pro-choice Christians, maybe from your previous church? How have those conversations gone?
Like I said, I mean, the fact that I had a pro-choice church just meant that it wasn't talked about. It didn't really mean that everyone in that church was pro-choice. I'm willing to bet a lot of them didn't even realize that the church had a position at all.
Right.
So it's not, and obviously I'm not attending that church anymore, so I don't really, I haven't unfortunately had really much opportunity for that type of encounter. I mean, great question. I wish I had. Maybe I should call up my old pastor.
Yeah. Have you had the opportunity to speak to pro-choice Christians? Like, what do you talk about how their worldview is inconsistent with their?
I usually don't take that tack, just because like I said, I'm an atheist. I'm no authority on the Bible. I just, when somebody's like, well, I should, it should be. I like to throw it back at them, basically. Like they say, well, I'm pro-choice, but I'm a Christian, but I'm pro-choice, and I think that should be the law. I'm like, well, we have separation of church and state here, ma'am. So your religious conviction should not, show. Oh, you don't think there's a soul until it passes through the birth canal? Really? What's your evidence for that?
Yeah. Yeah. Good. Yeah.
Because you have to have a secular basis for your laws. I don't care who you are.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, this question's from Josh. He asks, if we are all essentially a bunch of atoms and don't have a soul, then it seems like our value would be found in the fact that we have particular experiences. But a fetus has no experience, most of them, or like no cognitive experience. How would you reply to a second trimester pro-choice person who says that you need to have an experience of consciousness to have value?
I would say, so that is another good example of the type of criterion that a pro-choice person will put out there that, if applied consistently across the board, wouldn't just affect the unborn. If somebody is in a coma but expected to recover, it is not fair game to shoot them. So when we talk about consciousness and experiences, there's a fantastic article, and you might be able to get it on JSTOR or something like that. I don't know if it's really available online or not, but the philosopher Don Marquis puts together a secular case against abortion with the title "A Future Like Ours." The argument basically being, let's start with what exactly is wrong about killing in general. I mean, forget abortion. Like, what's wrong with murder, manslaughter? Right. That's already recognized in the law, right? And you can argue, okay, well, murder is wrong because it causes grief for the friends and family of the victim. It's like, well, that's true, but you can, there's no exception in the law for hermits, right? And people who are agoraphobic and have no community. That sort of, okay, well, maybe murder is wrong because of what it does to the perpetrator, that it's sort of a stain on their conscience or their psyche.
Right.
Well, maybe, but come on, we know that's not the primary reason. So you can kind of, by process of elimination, get to the fact that it's the reason it's wrong is that you're depriving the victim of their future experiences. And if that's true, then abortion would be wrong, because the fact that you're not experiencing something at this very moment. I mean, you can't shoot me in the head while I'm sleeping. That's not, it's not a matter of your conscious awareness in this particular moment. It's about what would killing you deprive you of.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a really good answer. Because we do deal with a lot of questions about, well, they're not conscious, they're not having experiences, so why do they matter? And obviously not wanting to talk about the soul or like all these other things. I think it is very valuable to understand how to talk about value.
Your level of consciousness, is going to ebb and flow throughout your life. So that, if you want consistent protection, that's probably not the criteria to use.
No, that's really good. What's your experience encountering like other people who are secular, and pro-life? Like, what are some reasons that they have given you for being pro-life?
A lot of the ones that I've mentioned already, the primary, especially when secular pro-life was just starting out. Now we're at a point where people have heard of us and they know, but in the first couple of years of our existence, I would get emails all the time that were like, thank you so much for existing. I thought I was the only pro-life atheist. You guys are amazing. A lot of people just weren't, they all felt isolated. They didn't think that they could speak out because, oh, well, no one else is speaking out. Better, guess it's just me. So, the fact that we've been, and really none of it could have happened without the internet. That's really why secular pro-life, I think, has come at the time that it has. It's not because I'm special. It's because the infrastructure is there. For so long, the pro-life movement was church-based, because it made sense. You had 2 millennia's worth of scaffolding where people were meeting every week and had like-minded opinions, and of course they're going to use that to organize to save babies. They should. I'm not saying that Christian pro-life organizing is a bad thing, but the secular counterpart of that, we just didn't have the institutions or even the capacity to find each other until social media.
Like, it's very much changed, right? Culture is very much changed, where there are a lot of people who are in defense of human rights and all these other things, but they're not religious. Mm-hmm. And I think that makes your work so important. So on a personal note, I was just curious, were you always pro-life, or did something happen, or did something
I'm sad to say I don't have some big conversion story.
That's okay.
Once I knew what abortion was, I knew it was wrong. But I wasn't raised to be a pro-life activist by any means. I know a lot of people who, when they were infants, were on the sidewalk, outside Planned Parenthood or whatever. That wasn't me. Right. So I'm not. I haven't been pro-life from the beginning to that extent, but I would say once I was getting to an age where I was paying attention to what the news and politics and that sort of thing. Certainly by high school I was pro-life, but I didn't really get involved until college.
Right.
So not that exciting of story.
That's okay. But can I ask, how have your parents reacted? Like, has that, or have they been supportive? Are they?
They've been supportive. So they love me and support me no matter what. They're just wonderful people. But every now, so I have a couple of times invited pregnant strangers into my home to live with me. And that has concerned them. They were not a huge fan of that practice initially. They realized that I'm an adult and I'm going to keep doing it and they can't stop me. But I would think that's like the one point where they were like, who is this? What are you doing?
Right.
But other than that,
Are they pro-life, or have you had those
They're,
conversations?
I mean, I think they generally are. They're not activists by any stretch of the
No, yeah.
imagination. No, but they find what I do interesting,
Mm-hmm.
and even with the having people at my home, they have come around a little bit. They're like, well, you're living your values. Good for you.
Yeah.
Don't let anybody take advantage of you, but good for you.
I do think that, and maybe at the end you can tell our students how they can get a hold of you, but I think some of them have struggled, and even myself, in families where, your family's not quite as living out their pro-life convictions to the degree that maybe you are, than maybe the degree that you want them to, or they're pro-choice.
I definitely have members of my extended family who are pro-choice, cousins and things like that, and they mostly just keep it to themselves because we're family first.
So let's take one more question here. So someone is asking here, what would you suggest for religiously affiliated activists to convince people that this argument can be made on purely secular grounds?
To make it from purely secular grounds, first of all, I mean, they are the ones who want to talk about religion, right? Because it's a distraction from talking about who the unborn child is and what happens to them in abortion. So you can make that pure secular argument, and they'll be the ones who come at you like, oh, well, you're just Catholic, aren't you? And the way I recommend responding to that would be to come at it with some humility and not kill them with kindness, but to say something like, well, it's true I grew up in the Catholic Church, but it would be really arrogant of me to think that that's the only religion that has anything to say about abortion. And then segue into whatever your point is. Just to acknowledge that there's a diversity of views out there and your church isn't the only one, can be disarming.
Right. Yeah, I think that's helpful. Thank you. So that brings our webinar to a close. So Kelsey, thank you so much for coming and answering all these questions. So how can people get a hold of you if they have more questions?
Yeah, so we're on Facebook, Twitter. You can email me, info@secularprolife.org. And I'm also on Instagram now, as we were mentioning at the beginning of this call. My Instagram username is Hazzard2Abortion. That's with 2 Z's.
Excellent.
Abortion. So excellent. Shoot me a line.
Yeah. Okay. So guys, thank you so much for coming. And just a couple announcements. So as we announced last week, our public shows are going to be moving to twice a month. But our student webinars are going to be continuing weekly. However, next Monday is a holiday, so we won't have a show for you guys that week, but we will continue the week of the 25th. And
what's next Monday?
May Long?
Huh?
May Long weekend?
May Long, oh, okay.
Is that it's not an American thing?
I guess not.
Oh, interesting.
We have Memorial Day.
To do with the Queen. That's probably why it has nothing to do with you.
Yeah, no, we don't get a holiday for the Queen.
Yeah, no. We do though. Probably one of the only perks. But anyway, so on the 25th, guys, we're going to be having another show. We're still figuring out the date and time, as you probably talked to your coordinators about. We have sent out a poll to see if you would like to do it at a different time. So please answer that poll this week so that as of the 25th, we can move the show to a different date and time if it's more convenient for you. On the 25th, the topic of our show is abortion procedures. So we're going to be joined by Dr. Ryan Wilson, who is the president of the Canadian Physicians for Life organization, and he's going to be coming and explaining to you guys everything to do with abortion procedures so that you can use the right medical terminology on campus. If you have any other questions, speak to your coordinator, and as always, take what you've learned today and implement it with them. So that is all for today. Kelsey, thank you again so much. And
thank you.
I get to talk to you again soon.